Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel, and at long last, I am finally home and I am finally ready to make some Borderlands 3 content here for the channel. Now, for those who don't know, I was flown out by 2K Games and Gearbox Software to the Borderlands 3 gameplay reveal event, where I was able to watch the presentation, I was able to play the game early and record footage of it, and here in this video, I want to give you guys my honest first impressions of the game after having played it for nearly 2 hours. Now, full disclosure here, I was flown out to the event once again by 2K and Gearbox. No money changed hands or anything like that. They're not paying for a review. This is not a sponsored video by any stretch of the imagination, but disclosure is important. They did pay for my flight there and back, as well as my hotel while I was in Los Angeles, so I thought I should mention that here at the very beginning of the video. So if you guys caught the gameplay reveal for Borderlands 3, a lot of you probably have the same first impressions that I did, right? Which was, holy crap, this game actually looks like a better version of Borderlands 2, which is really hard to pull off, right? Because Borderlands 2, in the eyes of Borderlands fans, is basically the pinnacle of the looter-shooter genre. It's the benchmark for the rest of the Borderlands franchise. Every other Borderlands game is going to be compared to Borderlands 2. Not to say the first game wasn't great, or that the pre-sequel wasn't an okay game, but in my opinion, the original game lacked a lot of quality of life improvements because it's a 10-year-old game, right? Of course, it definitely lacked a lot of those features. And then the pre-sequel, let's be honest, was pretty much an asset flip. It basically just took Borderlands 2 and built onto it a little bit, and of course they reused a lot of the weapons. But the thing about the pre-sequel is it was not really meant to be its own standalone game. It was basically meant to be kind of a filler game, if we're being honest, between Borderlands 2 and Borderlands 3 that also fills in the story, that little gap in the story there between Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2. The pre-sequel is what it is, right? But Borderlands 3 is not the pre-sequel 2.0. This game is so much different than Borderlands 2, but at the same time, it's the same core Borderlands experience that we've all come to love and we all come to expect from Gearbox Software. So let's go ahead and talk about some of those changes, some of the things that they're going to be doing to expand upon the Borderlands 2 formula, while at the same time making it feel like it still belongs in Borderlands. First up, we have the weapon brands, right? We still have all the weapon brands that we saw back in Borderlands 2, but they're also adding a couple of different ones and bringing back some old school ones, and every one of these weapon brands is going to do multiple things. So back in Borderlands 2, for example, Vladof weapons were known for, what, being Russian looking and having a fast fire rate? That was pretty much it, right? Well, here in Borderlands 3, not only do they retain that Russian look and the fast fire rate, but at the same time, they can also be modified in a number of different ways. Like, these Vladof weapons can alternate between a minigun mode and a rocket launcher mode. Sometimes you can add extra gun barrels and stuff to your guns. Like, they really take that feeling and that concept of the Vladof weapon, and they really expand upon it quite a bit. The same is true of the Jacobs weapons. Like, in my opinion, Jacobs weapons are some of the coolest looking weapons in the game, but in, like, Borderlands 2 and the original, they were kind of just boring because their claim to fame was high damage, low fire rate, and it's like, that's not really good when it comes to endgame. Well, when you go to Borderlands 3, not only are they high damage, typically low fire rate, but they also have a ricochet mechanic, and they do way more crit damage than virtually any other weapon in the game. So they're crit weapons, and when you do hit the enemy in their head or wherever their crit spot is, a bullet is going to ricochet from that target and hit another target, which does a bunch of damage. It's definitely a lot of fun. So they're really taking the weapon brands and cranking them up to 11, and also the uniques and the legendaries. I'll probably do an entire video talking about the legendaries. Don't expect me to cover every single one of them here, but legendaries are going to be a big deal in this game, and they did what the pre-sequel should have did, right? They have a bunch of new legendaries, which is fantastic, but at the same time, they're bringing back old school legendaries and giving them a different twist as well as a different model. One of my least favorite things about the pre-sequel was you would get a legendary drop in that game, and it would literally be the same gun you farmed forever back in Borderlands 2 with really no changes whatsoever. Well, here in Borderlands 3, as you guys can see, we have some old school style legendaries, but they're different looking, and they also have different mechanics, and it's just a really cool way of going about things. There are so many uniques, there are so many legendaries. The weapon brands in general are just like basically what we saw in Borderlands 2, but again, turned up to 11. There's a lot more to them in this game as compared to the previous ones. You guys have probably heard me talk about it before, so I won't reiterate every single one of them, but every brand does multiple things, and it is really, really satisfying. Next up, we have the Vault Hunters, right? And the Vault Hunters, of course, are going to be what we know from the Borderlands franchise. I mean, of course, we know what Borderlands Vault Hunters are going to be like. They're going to have 3 skill trees, they're going to have some main abilities and stuff like that, and that doesn't change here in this game. but it kind of does at the same time, because every single Vault Hunter has 3 main abilities that they can use, right? You get to pick one of those 3 main abilities and then put your points into your skill trees, which is really cool. You can swap between those main abilities pretty much whenever you want, and Zane has the ability to have 2 of those abilities at once. So the gameplay you guys are seeing here, I'm using the Sentinel drone as well as the decoy, basically. He puts out this projection of himself, which will shoot at targets, and he can swap places with it pretty much whenever he wants. It's really cool how they're doing that. So basically, we have new Vault Hunters with new abilities, but at the same time, these 4 Vault Hunters are each going to have 3 different main abilities, which is a really good change, because sometimes your action skill is not exactly useful in all situations, and so you can change it depending on how useful it's actually going to be. You guys know, I main Krieg in Borderlands 2. I freaking love Krieg. He's my favorite Vault Hunter in the Borderlands franchise, but if you're playing as a gun-focused Krieg as compared to a melee-focused Krieg, his action skill is pretty much useless. Like, if you're building into Bloodlust and Hellborn, very rarely are you going to activate your action skill Buzz Axe Rampage, because it's really not worth it. You're doing virtually no damage compared to what you'd be doing with your guns, right? So for all intents and purposes, if I'm going as a gun-focused Krieg, I don't activate my action skill whatsoever, which is a really bad feeling, right? Well, in Borderlands 3, that's not going to be the case, because there are 3 different of those action skill abilities per Vault Hunter, so you can really choose what's best for you and what's best for your situation, which is definitely pretty cool. Moving along here, the scope of Borderlands 3 appears to be much bigger than anything we've ever seen before. Not only do we have multiple planets to go to, but they have doubled down on the idea of boss encounters, which is something that I'm personally a very big fan of. I like leveling, don't get me wrong, like the leveling process is fun, doing the main story is fun, but when it comes to Borderlands, as you guys know, we typically have multiple playthroughs. You have your normal mode playthrough, your true Vault Hunter mode playthrough, and then typically after that, they add Ultimate Vault Hunter and maybe even OP levels on top of that. And so when that happens, you're playing through that game multiple times and you're beating the same bosses and doing the same story over and over. Well, to make this a little bit different, they're going to be randomizing a lot of those encounters, and they're also going to be adding a lot more bosses in this game as compared to the previous ones. And for me personally, end game is most important. Like, the end game of Borderlands is where I spend the majority of my time, and that's where I like to play, right? I like to be at max level with as many skill points as possible, farming out legendaries, taking down bosses, trying to beat raid bosses, and doing things like that. And it looks like here in Borderlands 3, we're going to have even more bosses than ever before, which means more places to go, more legendary drop locations, more uniques and things like that, which is definitely pretty cool. Now, the idea of us going to multiple planets is also a very interesting concept, because they keep saying that this game is going to be a lot bigger than the original game Borderlands 2 or the pre-sequel. And in my opinion, Borderlands 2 was a giant game. There was like so many places to go, so many things to do, but they're going to be expanding upon that apparently here in Borderlands 3. But at the same time, I'm also a bit concerned about that, because if we're going to have multiple planets, which right now we don't know the exact number, but call it maybe half a dozen at the very least, if we're going to all these planets, are they going to be very small, compact areas that we're actually allowed to explore? And will that actually make the game feel bigger or smaller? Because if we can go to Pandora, but we have a very limited area we can explore on Pandora, is that going to feel like a very big planet? Like, if we go to Promethea and we can only really go to that Atlas city, is that really going to feel like an entire planet or just a different kind of a zone, right? So I guess we're going to have to wait and see if this new planet system is going to make the game feel bigger or smaller than Borderlands 2. But at the very least, what they said is they wanted to try to make it so you don't get visually fatigued, which is definitely something that was a problem in the pre-sequel, in my opinion, because we're up there on the moon, on Elpis, brown rocks everywhere, right? That's like what we saw pretty much every location. We had lava, we had brown rocks, and we had like dark skies, essentially, right? Every zone we went to, and that definitely burnt me out personally. I don't know about you guys, but for me personally, when I played the pre-sequel, it felt like every zone was the same, essentially. Whereas in Borderlands 2, they did a good job of varying that up quite a bit. Like, a lot of the zones were definitely different. And then going back to the original game, most of the zones kind of felt like the Badlands. Like, it was mostly just like a desert with, you know, rocks and brown rocks everywhere and stuff like that. And it definitely added a lot of that visual fatigue. Well, the hope with Borderlands 3, they talked about this at the gameplay reveal, is that they want to make it so the planets all feel different and look different. So you feel like you're on a different place, you're doing different things, and you're seeing and experiencing different things. And I think that's definitely going to be a very good change for Borderlands 3. But again, the big question is, how big are these planets? how many of them are there going to be, and will these planets make the game feel bigger or smaller than Borderlands 2? Because again, the benchmark of the Borderlands franchise is pretty much Borderlands 2. And last but not least here, let's talk about player housing before we move on. Player housing and Sanctuary 3 look freaking fantastic. Like, the idea of a hub city is not new to the Borderlands franchise, but Sanctuary 3 looks incredible. Like, when I saw this at the gameplay reveal, I was blown away. It looks so freaking cool. And then the idea of player housing, where you have your own room, and we don't know the customization restrictions on this, but the room's going to differ based on the Vault Hunter you're playing, and you can put different guns up on the wall, which is so cool, right? That's so freaking cool. Those of you who have seen my Borderlands Let's Plays know I tend to get sentimental when it comes to certain guns, and I tend to keep them. Like, when we did the Borderlands Remastered playthrough, I held on to TK's Wave the entire time. It's TK Baja's gun. Of course I'm going to hold on to it, right? Well, in Borderlands 3, instead of holding on to that gun the entire time, I could just mount it on the wall in my little player house area, and that's definitely pretty cool. But just all in all, the scope of the game looks bigger than ever before, but I suppose it's going to come down to how those planets are actually going to play out. Now, moving along here, the co-op, right? Borderlands is known for being a very good single-player game, but it's also a co-op game for a lot of us. Lots of us play with our friends and family and stuff like that, and it looks like here in Borderlands 3, the co-op is going to be better than ever before. Now, I was not able to play co-op. At the event, all we could play was single-player in a very limited area on Promethea, but what we saw during the gameplay reveal was that co-op is going to be better than ever because of level scaling, as well as loot instancing for those of you who want to actually utilize that. But at the same time, loot instancing is not going to be forced upon us. We can choose to play in classic mode, which is where I'm personally going to play. So to quickly cover that, loot instancing is basically going to be, if you're playing co-op with any people, friends or not, everybody's going to have their own loot. Like, if you open up a chest, everybody is going to have their own loot that spawns in that chest that only they can interact with, right? Or you can choose to play classic mode and everyone has to share the loot that is dropped. That's how I'm personally going to play because I'm a bit old school that way, but there's going to be a choice there, right? If you're playing with random people and something drops off the boss like a legendary, pretty much everybody gets that legendary as compared to, you know, one person's taking it from everybody else and then logging out or anything like that. Now, when it comes to level scaling, this is actually very cool. It's so good for a co-op game. I'm so happy that many games are starting to do this. What they're going to be doing is, let's say you're level 50 and your brother starts to want to play the game, right? Your brother starts out at level 1 and you want to go with them, but you don't want to start a whole new character. Well, because of the level scaling, you can be in that person's game. They can be level 1, you can be level 50, and everything in the game is going to scale to whoever's actually playing it, right? So the level 1 guy, everyone's going to be level 1 around him. His guns are going to do level 1 damage, whereas for the level 50 guy, all the enemies are going to be level 50, and all the loot's going to be level 50, and basically everything is going to scale as if you were the exact same level. It's very hard to explain for some reason, but it's going to work out. I've seen it used in other games. It's going to be happening in Borderlands 3 as well. Basically, you can be level 20, they can be level 40, and it does not matter. Everything will scale perfectly. The loot will scale, the enemies will scale, the damage will scale. You can play with anybody regardless of level, and that is a freaking awesome idea. And then on top of that, of course, we have all the little things that we have here in Borderlands 3. I mean, we're talking about countless different weapons and weapon customization, the Echo Net being on your character at all times. Sliding is a very satisfying feeling here in this game, as is mantling. Like, they basically gave us advanced movement here in Borderlands 3, which is really weird. I noticed while playing as Amara, I can butt slam if I jump off of a very high height, which is definitely pretty cool. I'm not sure if this is limited to her or if this is going to be a feature for everybody. If you simply just jump up in the air and then press crouch like you would in the pre-sequel, you're not going to do your butt slam, right? But if you jump off a high area and then do that, you're going to butt slam down, which is kind of cool. They really just doubled down on the movement. The Echo Net is so convenient. I mean, it's all the little things that is really making Borderlands 3 turn out to be a really good game, in my opinion. Now, full disclosure, once again, we only played for about 2 hours, just under 2 hours, and we only played in one area on Promethea, and we only had access to 2 of the 4 Vault Hunters. But from what I played, I mean, everything that I talked about here in this video reigns true. The weapon brands are a lot more interesting while still feeling like Borderlands. The Vault Hunters are what we would expect from the game, but better because every one of them has multiple action skills they can choose from. The scope of the game appears to be huge. I mean, just in general, the game looks to be freaking fantastic, guys. And this is not just, you know, speculation from somebody who's like sitting at home watching trailers and watching gameplay footage. I was there playing the game, and it's exactly what I thought it was going to be, but better. And that's definitely a pretty cool feeling. Now, I will say some of the potential downsides of the game would be the business model, right? It's 2019, right? We always have to talk about this kind of stuff because here in 2019, virtually every game developer and publisher is trying to do really weird things. Of course, there's been a lot of controversy in regards to Borderlands 3 because of the decision to forego Steam and instead go to the Epic Store. And now we're going to be talking about microtransactions, right? At the event, there was some really weird wording. Randy Pitchford almost made it sound like there were going to be no microtransactions whatsoever outside of course, paying for campaign DLC like we've seen in the previous games. Well, apparently that's not exactly true. What he meant to say was there's not going to be a premium currency. There's not going to be a gold or a Borderlands bucks or anything like that in the game. There will be microtransactions in the form of cosmetic skins, either for your character or perhaps your Echo Net or maybe even your weapons, because weapon skins are going to be a thing here in this game. But you're not going to be able to get them with an in-game currency or anything like that. They're going to be directly purchasable for cash, and that's it, right? Very cut and dry, very basic, very old school in that respect. But I'm still concerned about that, right? Because microtransactions are a very slippery slope. It starts off as cosmetic, but we have to wonder, like, how long are they going to remain cosmetic? And going back to Borderlands 2, who remembers some of the really cool Easter egg skins that we could get? Like, for example, the Minecraft skins for doing that Easter egg. What if stuff like that just becomes a microtransaction in Borderlands 3 rather than being directly unlockable within the game itself? Then, of course, there's always the question of what exactly was cut from the main game and repackaged as a microtransaction. Like, if we have a really cool looking skin for Flak, for example, that just looks fantastic and everybody wants it, I mean, who's to say that was not cut from the base game and then repackaged and resold to us as DLC, which therefore makes us spend more money to get access to the content that we want? It's a very slippery slope. But when you're talking about cosmetics in Borderlands, they've never really been that big of a deal because the skins, I mean, it's a first-person game, right? So, like, the skin you have on your character really doesn't matter besides it changes, I guess, the color of your hands or your gloves or something like that, depending on which character you're playing as. But by and large, they don't really matter whatsoever. But as you guys know, here in Borderlands 3, they're taking that Borderlands 2 model and, again, turning it up to 11. They're going to be adding Echo Net skins, and there's tons of vehicle skins, and they're going to be, of course, different player skins, but also weapon skins on top of that. You guys may know about the gold weapon pack that they keep trying to push via pre-ordering. That weapon skin is going to be able to be applied to every weapon in the game. Legendary, epic, common, whatever. It does not matter. It's essentially going to be like a weapon camo that you can apply to every single weapon in the game. There's going to be a number of other skins as well that you get for pre-ordering. So I have to wonder, like, are we going to be able to unlock any of those skins via playing the game, or will all weapon skins essentially be microtransactions? And what does this mean for DLC Vault Hunters in the future? I mean, using Borderlands 2 and the pre-sequel as an example, I mean, each one of those games had DLC Vault Hunters. Will we be seeing those here in Borderlands 3 as well? Because I certainly hope so. My favorite Vault Hunter of all time was a DLC Vault Hunter, so we're going to have to wait and see, guys. It's definitely a slippery slope when it comes to microtransactions, but they've given us their word that they will remain cosmetic only. They will not be game-changing. There will be no premium in-game currency or supply drops or anything like that. So I suppose we will have to wait and see how things are going to play out. But ladies and gentlemen, after having played the game for about 2 hours, my impressions are incredibly high. I have very high expectations for Borderlands 3. Even going into the gameplay event, I had super high expectations. And from a gameplay perspective, it exceeded all of them. The movement was awesome. The Vault Hunters were so freaking cool. Even though I want to main Flak, like, based on just the character and like what we know about them so far, like, I want to play as Flak, but I couldn't even play as Flak. I played as Zane as well as Amara, and it was fun playing as them and using the different action skills, and the weapons were so freaking fun, and the characters and the story and just everything about it was so good. It exceeded all my expectations, and now we're basically left waiting for the other events that Gearbox will be attending leading up until the launch of Borderlands 3 in September. If you guys don't know, they are going to be at a number of different events, and I imagine they're going to be revealing different aspects of the game at those events. Like, for example, hopefully Moe's as well as Flak, and maybe some different planets and things like that. That would definitely be pretty cool. But just in general, my expectations were really high, and typically when you have such high expectations, you're usually let down, at least most of the time. Fallout 76 is fresh in my memory, but this time around, it does not appear that that's going to be the case. My expectations were not only met, but they were exceeded. Like, Borderlands 3 looks freaking phenomenal, and I cannot wait to learn more. After having played the game and experienced it, and being at the gameplay reveal event, and just seeing everything that I possibly could see, the game looks freaking phenomenal. This is the proper sequel to Borderlands 2 that we've waited for and that we deserve as Borderlands fans. This is not going to be the pre-sequel 2.0. This is going to be a proper sequel to Borderlands 3. They've been working on this game, since 2014, I think they said? It's been like 5 years they've been working on this game. They're not rushing it by any stretch of the imagination, and that is freaking incredible, guys. But ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have for you here in this video. Those are my honest first impressions of Borderlands 3 so far, and expect many more Borderlands videos that go up here on the channel in the very near future, talking about different things we saw at the event, as well as, of course, the weapons. I'll probably have a legendary weapon video going up here pretty soon, but as well as on top of that, the action skills for Amara as well as Zane, and talking about the character breakdowns and stuff like that. We have many more videos planned here for the channel, so stay tuned for that. But until then, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please drop me a rating. Thank you guys all so much for listening, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day.